Today I'm going to talk about our Creator's design that He has in place to help keep us from chasing our tails. His Torah is set up to help keep us focused on learning His will and not on all of the hustle and the bustle of life. Daniel was told that many would run to and fro and that knowledge would increase and then the end would come. This is what has happened. Just look at man today with all of their technology and how people's lives are so busy in the modern world. Whether it is with their personal lives or their busy schedules with their children or their recreational activities or with their jobs and keeping up with the Joneses, and people are just running to and fro like crazy. How does this fit into why we were created? It does not. King Solomon was given incredible wisdom, and the book of Ecclesiastes records him squandering his life away in pursuit of fame and fortune. He pursued more education and more wealth. He chased after more women and more pleasure. You name it, and his soul desired it. Then at the end of it, he concluded to his son, "Hence by these things, my son, be admonished. There is no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the flesh." So here is the conclusion of the entire reason that we have life. Fear Elohim and hedge about his commandments, because this is the entirety or the whole of man. Because Elohim will bring every deed into judgment, with everything that is concealed even, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Does this scare you? Do you fear having every thought that you have ever had being accounted for? It should. Yeshua said in Matthew 12, verse 36 and 37, he says, "But I say to you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. Because by your words you will be rendered innocent, and by your words or by your logos you will be condemned." We should fear not being found in our Creator's will, and fear not being found learning and living His character, but most do not. Today I'm going to talk about some of His commandments that He gave us on a physical plane that were given to us to help be a constant reminder to us to stay on His narrow path. They are given so that we will constantly be reminded that we are being set apart to Him, and to be on guard against anything that would defile us and remove us from His presence, remove His presence from us. Recently I've been speaking often of His commandment that is being given at this time for those who will return to Him to cover their heads. Covering their heads was just a way of life for ancient Israel, as a sign of being under His covering and under the covering of His protective wings. Of course, even living all of the commandments on a physical plane will not separate us unto Him by themselves. We can live them in vain by not living why they were given. Israel of old is proof of this. But they are to be reminders to us, and they do carry symbolic reasons along with them. Today, covering our heads is also meant to symbolize coming under the covering of His Son's blood, as well as being under His protective wings. I have talked about how covering your heads on a physical plane without turning from your ways to His path is nothing more than covering your head in hypocrisy, so I'm not going to go into all of that again today. The same goes with all of the commandments that I am going to talk about today. Obeying Him on a physical plane by itself will mean nothing by itself. You have to sign the contract through genuine repentance in order to make the obedience real in His eyes. The next commandment that I will speak of today is that we are to wear braided twinings or tassels of cerulean blue on the four corners of our garments and our outer coverings. We are to do this as a constant reminder of His commandments, is the reason that is given to us in Numbers 15:38, where it's covered, and it's also mentioned in Deuteronomy 22:12. They are not to be flashy in order to be esteemed of by men. This is what Yeshua meant when He said in Matthew 23, verse 5, "But all their works they do to be beheld of by men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the tassels of their garments." It is very important to notice that Yeshua is not condemning them for wearing them. He is condemning them for making a show of them. He wore these tassels on His garments. We read this in Matthew 9:20. And behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood for 12 years came behind Him and touch the tassel of his robe. Robe there's the Strong's number 2440. Don't believe me? Look up the word. And again in Matthew 14:36 we read, and they besought him that they might only touch the tassels of his robe, and as many as touched them were made perfectly whole. Yes, he wore a robe as well. This was customary. The King James translates this word as garments in these two verses. Here is another place that the same word is used twice in two verses to prove that it is referring to a robe and not just to garments. In Matthew 21 verse 7 and 8, and brought the ass and the colt and put their clothes, same word, 2240, on him, and they set him thereon. And a very great multitude spread their garments in the way, same word, and the others cut down branches from the trees, and they spread them in the way. Obviously they never put their clothes on the ass, and they did not spread their inner garments or their clothes on the path either. They put their outer garments or their robes on the ass and on the path. Back to the fringes, they are a simple instruction to remind us of his commandments as recorded. Why would this be a burden for any of you? Would you be embarrassed wearing them? Here's a picture of the example of what I wear. It certainly does not need to be done in this exact way. This is just an example. As you can see from the photo, I simply put blue tassels on the sleeves and on the hem of the robe and on the four corners of the head covering. The head covering certainly does not need to be this design either. As far as the border of blue on the robe and on the head covering, this is not something that is specifically commanded for everybody, but it is just something that I was led to do. The instructions came with the change of remnant that he led me to. The same is the case with the belt that you see for the robe. It is a braided linen belt that is dyed with purple, blue, and scarlet. It is a reminder of his three-tier plan. The blue is symbolic of walking with him in his Torah, and the scarlet is symbolic of being cleansed by his son's blood, symbolic of the blood, and the purple is symbolic that we are becoming a holy and set-apart people to him. Neither of these is specifically commanded for everybody, but we all are commanded to be in training to become a kings and priests to him. We are to be set apart from all that defiles us. It is clear that Yeshua wore the tassels, and it is clear that he wore an outer garment or a robe, and precept upon precept it is clear that he had his head covered as well. He will certainly return with his robe on and his head covered. This is recorded, and we are commanded to follow his example. And it's certainly the case. It's clear in scriptures. You can prove that back then Israel of old did cover their heads. The saints of old did. Here's a picture of the tassels that I have on my pant legs, and again, this is just an example. I also have them on the ends of my shirt sleeves. These commandments are beautiful in design if we live them and live this spiritual intent of them. They are given to help us grow in his righteousness. We are to reflect on why he gave them to us, and they are a reminder that we are claiming to bear his name. With that, we had bear to fear wearing them in vain by blaspheming his character that we claim to represent as we wear them. This reverence and fear helps us become like him. If you fear not passing a class, you will study hard and you will show up for class so that you will do well, so that you won't fail. I will now move on to what those calling themselves Jewish today refer to as the Tefillin. Back to Matthew 23:5, but all their works they do to be held of by men, they make broad their phylacteries. The phylacteries in this verse are referring to something on our foreheads and our hands they wore back then, and of course they wear today. The Jewish, those calling themselves Jewish, do on their prayer days. Obviously, as I said, Yeshua did not condemn them for wearing them, but he did condemn them for how they wore them. Today, what the so-called Jewish people wear for their prayer service is exactly what Yeshua was referring to. They wear these boxes on their forehead with scriptures in them, and then some fancy braided leather straps down their arms, and then they are tied into their hands. All show. The question is it a commandment to wear something on our foreheads and on our hands to remind us of his laws or not? the tassels certainly are commanded. They're clearly commanded. So what about these what they call Teflon today? Is a tamed down version of them is required or not? So we'll read here first of all where they get the commandment from is Deuteronomy 6 verse 8, and found again another place in Deuteronomy 11. You shall bind them, speaking of the commandments, as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. At first glance, it would appear that we're commanded to wear them. But as we look elsewhere, the words that Moses recorded here were used to mean that we are to keep them in the front of our thoughts always, and that we must practice them in our everyday actions. It is what we think and what we do. The sign upon our hands means by what we do or by how we live, and the frontlets between our eyes means that we are to always think on them and meditate on them. They must be on the front of our thoughts, all of them. We must bring every thought into subjection to His will and measure them against His measuring rod. This is how we are made in His image. You become what you think about most. This can be proven by what I said about the fact that our thoughts and our actions can be proven by turning to another recorded text of Moses in Exodus 13 verse 15 and 16. And it came to pass when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that Yahweh slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. I therefore sacrificed to Yahweh all males that opened the matrix, and I redeem all the firstborn of the children. And it shall be a sign upon your hand and frontlets between your eyes, because by the strength of Yahweh's hand He brought us forth out of Egypt. Obviously, we cannot sacrifice the firstborn of our livestock on our foreheads and on our hands. It is to be forever in our thoughts, and we are to practice what He spoke. And of course, the sacrifices are a whole other issue, but that's what He's saying in these verses. It is what we think and what we do that is commanded. It is the exact same terminology used here as in Deuteronomy 6 and 11, except there is one word missing in this example, and it is the word for to bind. The Hebrew word that bind is translated from is kashar, and it means to tie or to mentally gird, or even stronger in some cases. Here is an example of its use in 1 Samuel 18 verse 1. And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So obviously it does not mean that it has to be tied in a physical way. He couldn't tie his soul to David's soul with some leather straps going down his arm and on his hand. So anyhow, another example of this was just of the example in Exodus 13, 14 and 15 was in Exodus 13:9, where Moses said that the Feast of Unleavened Bread was to be a sign on our hand and a memorial between our eyes. How do you have a feast tied between, a 7-day feast tied between your eyes, or your forehead between your eyes, and through leather straps going down, on your arms and tied around your hand? Obviously you can't. That being said, though, Yeshua did not condemn them for having them, just for the way that they wore them. They wore them broad to be seen as ultra-religious. So if you want to wear something on your head to remind you of His commandments, He certainly did not condemn this. Just don't make it to be seen in a flaunting way. The main thing that you had better to have right on this is that His commandments are to always be in the front of your mind, and they are what you must live and what you must practice, because this is the commandment. Next, we are to post the commandments on our doorpost and on our gates. In Deuteronomy 6:9, and you shall write them on the post of your house and on your gates. Which ones? That is certainly up to you. He does not specify. If you want to post the 10 Commandments or the 2 that Yeshua said that they all hang from, this is up to you. Personally, I like the idea of the 2 that all commandments, even all part above even not just the 10, but all the commandments hang from the 2 commandments. Love Elohim with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. What about the beards for men? In Leviticus 19:27, you shall not compass the borders of your head, neither shall you destroy the borders of your beard. It is pretty clear that we are to not corrupt the borders of our beard. If you think that it is okay to trim your beard after reading this is certainly your choice. He definitely makes it pretty clear here. If you want to read your own interpretation into it and have no fear of being wrong on this, that will reflect in your other actions as well. You probably won't be wearing the blue tassels or covering your head either, I'm sure, because you have no fear. I have learned that the beard is just another identifying mark that I'm agreeing to obey him, and of course has other reasons as well. I've talked about in other videos, but it's also is a surface identification that shows that others are not seeking to obey him if they don't have it, just as the tassels are surface identifying marks. Of course, wearing tassels and having untrimmed beards do not mean that the person is in his will either, yet they are an introductory sign that they might be trying to be in his will. What about the other part of this verse about encompassing the borders of our heads? I read somewhere once that there is historical evidence that the pagans wore circular type haircuts, but I do not know this for sure. What I do know for sure is that the Jewish skull caps and the round coverings that the pagan Roman Catholic priests from the mother whore of Babylon wear today sure look like they are wearing encompassing circles on the tops of their heads. You can go into everything, the Greek Orthodox and what they wear, and the round little hats and stuff. Anyway, I would flee from such ideas for covering my head if I were you. It is a mockery of his covering, and this verse certainly points to the condemnation of such round caps on your head. These are just a few of the physical commandments that he has given us to help separate us, help separate our minds, to be reminders. There are others like not painting our bodies, etc. So obviously you wouldn't want to go out and get tattoos. Some of you already have tattoos, and not much you can do about that. You look forward to the day when Yeshua returns, and as well as other physical ailments and stuff will be healed. They sure can be just removed at that time. But till then, bear them as a reminder that you weren't obeying him back then when you got them. As far as the robes and the head coverings, precepts upon precepts points to that they are to be made out of white linen. The new wardrobe that he clothed me with is white linen. The white linen is symbolic of the purifying effect of his son's blood and the white robes that the saints will be given. But with the head coverings, it is also to help us keep our eyes single on being made white by his blood, so that we do not take his blood for granted. I will close today with some very important instructions from our Messiah. In Matthew 6, verse 33, seek first, meaning seek first in priority, the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. It must be our number one focus above everything else. And in Matthew 6:22, 23, the light of the body is the eye. Therefore, if your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, meaning it's not single, what it should be, then your whole body will be full of darkness. Therefore, if the light that is in you is darkness, then great is that darkness. Notice here that the darkness is still a light, he's saying. It is just that it is Satan's light. Satan's traps look good on the surface. The religion of Christianity, full of thrill and, rejoicing and celebration and such. Yet the blasphemous lies are laced all through it. Our eye must be focused on his kingdom and on obtaining his righteousness. If a white robe and some blue tassels and a head covering and a beard are going to help me stay focused, I'm in. And I tell you what, they have too. It's amazing how it's worked to come under subjection to his will. Plus, they are not suggestions anyway. They are commandments. They are to be a way of life, just as are the rest of his Torah. They were given to us, to help keep us from chasing our tails. They are the way. Walk ye in them.